Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. Today we are very, very lucky to have Dr. Rachael Williams joining us for her presentation on how climate change affects mental health in Caribbean small and developing states. Dr. Williams is an experienced educator and researcher. She has over 20 years of experience in teaching and the application of research methodology and biostatistics in agriculture, health, environmental science, amongst other scientific disciplines in the Caribbean, which is where she does the majority of her work, or at least the work that we'll be hearing about today. Um, Dr. Williams has a PhD in environmental engineering and science from Clemson University in the US, a Master of Arts in statistics from the Pennsylvania State University, and a Master of Science in biometry from the University of Reading, which we were just having a fantastic chat about. I will pass over to Dr. Williams in just a moment here. The format will be as per usual. Dr. Williams will be talking for roughly half an hour to 45 minutes or so. And of course, there will be time at the end for questions, should you have any. So please, if you have questions, write them down in the chat as we go along, or note them down and ask them at the end, and there will be time for that. So thank you very much to you all. And thank you, of course, Dr. Williams. I'll pass over to you now.
Thank you, Joshua, and welcome everyone to my presentation. This presentation came about in 2024 when I did my first presentation on this topic via the University of Hamburg in Germany. And they asked me to write a paper, which I did. And part of my presentation is relating to the paper that came out last year, November, in the journal Nature. And I'll share the link with you. It's in my presentation. I've also added some new information that I found since my paper was published. So I want to set some context for the presentation. What are small island developing states and why are they so important? In 1992, at the UN Conference on Environment and Development, the international community formally declared SIDS, or Small Island Developing States, a special case both for environment and development, and they committed to assist us to meet sustainable development objectives. The document that came out of that conference is known as Agenda 21. This was further followed up in 1994 in Barbados with the document, the Barbados Program of Action, which was then continued in 2005 in Mauritius, and the document then was the Mauritius Strategy of Implementation. In 2014, there was another conference, this time in Samoa, which is one of the islands in the Pacific. And the document related to that conference is, or was, the Samoa Pathway. And for that particular conference, I was involved as a consultant with the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, which is based in Belize. And I supervised 4 consultants in the area of renewable energy technology. And then in 2024, the last conference so far on SIDS was held in Antigua and Barbuda, where the theme of the conference was charting the course toward resilient prosperity. Now, SIDS exists in 3 regions of the world. In the Caribbean, where I'm from Trinidad actually, the Pacific, and what is known as the AIS region. And there are 58 SIDS in total. And unfortunately, we experience some of the most devastating impacts of health effects of climate change, yet major gaps exist in research on the links between climate change and mental health in SIDS. In SIDS, we have extreme variations in coastal ecosystems, topography, culture, economies of scale, land governance, and resource capacities. And climate change causes severe economic losses, reduced economic productivity, threats to health and well-being, and population displacement. I'll be getting into some of this later on in my presentation. The purpose of my paper was to determine the current state of research conducted in SIDS on mental health and climate change and make recommendations for further work. So basically, I use key search terms which are mental health and climate change, small island developing states. 2 key articles were found, which are listed here. And I also used references from those articles and other articles that I found. And of course, information gained from my years of living not only in Trinidad, but working in other islands in the Caribbean. So these are some of the results that came from my research. These are just 5 results, but in my paper, there are 8 listed. I organize them according to importance. The first one is there's a lack of studies on public mental health interventions in SIDS. Currently, there are only few studies that focus on public mental health interventions for climate change. And one of the things we have to be mindful of is that in disaster management, we have to use a population level perspective, not an individual person perspective. Gap 2, unknown consequences of the long-term effects of climate change on mental health in SIDS. Very little work has been done in this area. And one of the papers that I mentioned in this gap in 2018, he actually looked at the relationship between meteorological data and population-based databases. And what he did was he looked at the associations between past climate variations, which is from a statistical perspective, retrospective data, because he went back in the past to see what is the relationship between climate change then and mental health. Third gap, we have inadequate research on mental health and well-being impacts caused by gradual changes due to climate change. Some of the gradual changes are warming ocean and atmosphere, rising sea levels, ocean acidification, changes in ecosystem, and changes in land and freshwater. 2 other gaps I identified were there's limited research conducted on the impact of climate change-related migration on the mental health and overall well-being of persons living in SIDS. Some of you may be aware that in the Pacific, which is one of the regions where SIDS is located, they have already started migrating some of the citizens in one of the islands, which is Tuvalu. And I know that Tasmania, Australia, and New Zealand have been either in agreement or have agreed to take some of the citizens because of the problems with sea level rise and continuing to live when the seawater is rising. The last gap that I identified here is a lack of research on the use of effective music and spiritual interventions as therapeutic options to address mental health problems. It is known that music interventions are a potential alternative for depression instead of medications. But as I mentioned, some of this work has not been done as yet in the Caribbean SIDS. This is a paper that came out last year that was published in the journal Nature. If you want to get the link, just find me on LinkedIn. It's in my profile. Or if you want to take a screenshot, you can take it here and access the article. It's a much more in-depth article. So what I want to do now is to add to the information that came out in my paper last year, based on what I have discovered since. And I want to highlight something here that I was not aware of. From 2004 to last year, we've had several Category 5 hurricanes in the Caribbean. Category 5 is the most destructive type of hurricane you can get. I remember Hurricane Ivan in 2004 because I returned to Trinidad in 2004. Ivan struck Grenada, and I actually went across to do a workshop in Grenada. And I remember flying across Grenada and just seeing blue tarpaulins because most of the houses lost their roofs. I'm sure some of you, if you all were in the States, you remember Katrina. It affected Louisiana, which is south of the US. 2017, Dominica did a lot of damage to Maria. Maria did a lot of damage to Dominica, so much so that the Prime Minister of Dominica contacted the Prime Minister of Trinidad asking for help because the majority of schools were destroyed. And they wanted to see if we could help them in Trinidad to incorporate some of these school students until they could get their schools running again in Dominica. 2019, Dorian hit the Bahamas. And one of the things that happened with Dorian, it also happened last year with Hurricane Melissa. And this is a trend that has been happening now with some of these hurricanes. The hurricanes are slowly just staying over the region and causing much more damage than normally, because normally they hit and then they leave. But in these two cases in particular, Dorian and Melissa, the hurricane just hovered. If you check at the very end of this slide, Hurricane Melissa rapidly intensified a second time. It hit on the 27th of October last year, and the winds were as high as 306 kilometers per hour. When you are driving on the interstate or the highway, the most I have ever driven is 120 kilometers. I cannot even imagine 306. And that is the kind of strength hurricane that hit Western Jamaica last year. This is one of the pictures, one of the scenes from Jamaica last year. And if you notice here, the electricity poles are down, the rooftops are gone, and there's destruction in the streets. And this was replicated throughout a lot of the western parts of Jamaica. And this is the kinds of scenes that are happening more frequently in the Caribbean. Now, I want to give you these statistics, and this is without the effect of climate change, okay? And I'm saying this so that you'll see what happens when climate change is now imposed on the average individual living in the Caribbean. Unfortunately, the anxiety rates in the Caribbean are higher now compared to the OECD countries and also the average globally, our small Caribbean. Another thing that is not, that has to be addressed is that in the Caribbean, sorry, in the Latin America and the Caribbean region or the LAC region, we have on average 3 psychiatrists per 100,000 people, which is significantly below the OECD average of over 18 per 100,000. So what is happening in the Caribbean is that we have increasing levels of anxiety and depression, but unfortunately, the current rate of anxiety in the Caribbean is higher than outside the Caribbean. Now, what is happening to cause these problems? And I haven't added the climate change factors yet. First of all, we have hardly enough mental health practitioners in the region, doctors, nurses, and supporting staff. Most persons cannot afford care. For millions of people in Latin America and the Caribbean, accessing affordable and high-quality medicine is not possible. What are some cost-effective alternatives to this? I mentioned this lower down in my presentation. Access to care is another huge barrier, but one of the largest barriers is mental health stigma. And I only realized this particular statistic a couple months ago, and I was very shocked to find how high it was. It is 60% and higher in some countries, meaning 60% of the population in the Caribbean and higher have a problem admitting that they have a mental health problem, be it anxiety, depression, or on the other side of the age bracket, you have Alzheimer's, dementia, and other possibilities as well. And some of the reasons I came across for the high prevalence of mental health stigma, some are religious reasons, how people are thinking. Some profess lack of faith, not pray. I'm not clear as yet why, and I'm still reading up on that. But one of the solutions to that is online help for the younger age bracket, because they actually welcome online help as opposed to face-to-face. And the faith-based communities, churches, and individuals who can help. Another problem is that about 70% of persons who need mental health care, they don't get it. Another problem is low physical and mental activity. And this is not only for the elderly. One of the things that is happening now because of excessive use of cell phones in the younger generation, a lot of the younger ones are not exercising or doing any kind of very low physical activity. On the other end of the age bracket, I keep hearing persons who I speak with, when I ask them what are they doing after they retire, a typical response is, I'm not doing anything. One of the things that people need to be aware of, if you don't use your brain, the muscle physically shrinks in size. And two of the known risk factors for mental health issues are low physical and low mental activity. Social isolation got worse during COVID, and that is something some of the elderly persons are experiencing now because they are still isolating themselves for fear of different reasons. Poor eating habits, again, once you eat food, the body digests it. The nutrients flow into the bloodstream. So if you're eating healthy, your brain is getting healthy nutrients. If you're not eating healthy, it is not getting healthy nutrients. So all of these factors here combined are causing the current situation with mental health problems in the Caribbean. What is mental health stigma? Basically, it's an individual who has been disqualified from full social acceptance. And there are different types. You have self-stigma, you have stigma by association, you have public stigma, and you have structural stigma. And this one here, I resonate with this because it talks about inequalities which result from laws, policies, and practices. And just for an example, the difference in how genders are treated, male versus female, I can see this happening here in structural stigma. Now, if you're not familiar, these are some of the climate-related stressors that we face in the Caribbean, and usually from hurricanes. Extreme rainfall and winds, coastal and inland flooding. We have coastal erosion. We have rise in ocean acidity, meaning the pH of the ocean has now changed due to an increase in carbon emissions, basically because the carbon dioxide is what is causing the ocean acidification to increase, but it is due to carbon emissions. And this leads to loss of marine life, which is affecting those who use fish or other sea creatures as their source of income. You have freshwater sources becoming salty due to the point above. Again, we have loss of marine life. We have land and marine heat waves. When you have the ocean warming up, again, you're affecting the marine life. You're losing life, leading to loss of income again. We have an increase in invasive species. An invasive species is something not endemic to the country. And one example in the Caribbean is the algae sargassum, which is a brown seaweed. It's also visible in Florida, in the southern part of the US. And it has taken over a lot of the beaches in the Caribbean. But one of the good things is that there are uses for sargassum, one of which is it can be used as a fertilizer. Vector-borne diseases in the Caribbean, the four key ones that we experience here are due to, the first three are due to the mosquito, infected mosquitoes. We have dengue, malaria, yellow fever. And we have another disease called leishmaniasis, which is spread by an infected sandfly. We also experience an increase in air pollution. Currently, in the last couple of weeks, we have been experiencing a rise in what is known as Sahara dust, which is coming from Africa. And it's not only dust, there's also a lot of pollutants in the atmosphere. Now, let us add climate change now onto what is currently happening in the Caribbean. How does climate change increase mental health risks in the Caribbean? In addition to anxiety, we now have the term called eco-anxiety, which is anxiety related specifically to environmental disasters. In our case, it is usually hurricanes. And this is especially experienced among the youth. We have an increase in depression and PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. All of these have increased due to climate change in the Caribbean. And this also applies in the other SIDS as well. One of the things that happened in 2019 with Hurricane Dorian, and I mentioned a reference in the slide after, which I encourage you to take a look at. because it really hit me. I was not there, but I felt it when I read the article. People were actually witnessing bodies flowing down running water because of the strength of that hurricane in Dominica. Families were separated. There was a lot of damage to properties, be it your home, churches, schools, buildings. Internet was disrupted in almost the whole of the island. You also have extended disruptions of electricity, water, communications, transport, food supplies. And then apart from persons who have been impacted by the climate change, you also have an increase in the mental health risk from those taking care of those affected, meaning your primary care workers, which would be your doctors, your nurses, and your supporting staff. So you have mental health issues from those helping those issues, but they now have they're now being overwhelmed because of the numbers and the types of problems that have arisen now because of climate change. You also have some who prior to the event did not have mental health conditions, but because of the event now, they have now developed a mental health issue. We also have delays in access to psychiatric providers, services, and medications because of damage to local health systems. We have a loss of income and employment opportunities because of the hurricane. You have an increase in anxiety and depression, and also other problems like suicidal thoughts, particularly among the youth. This is the article I was referring to just now. If you want to take a screenshot of this really brought it home to me what people in Dominica face. Sorry, not Dominica, the Bahamas. Sorry, this was the Bahamas, as a result of Hurricane Dorian. Bottom line, this is one of the articles I read. There's a 10% increase in wind yields because of climate change affecting the strength and intensity of these hurricanes. What is causing all of this? An increase in carbon emissions, which is not happening in the SIDS, primarily is happening in China, US, and India. Those are the three leading culprits for an increase in carbon emissions around the world. What is causing the carbon emissions? The main culprit is an increase in the use of fossil fuels. For example, fossil fuels could be coal, oil, and natural gas. Unfortunately, despite the fact that some are moving towards renewable energy technology, some still prefer to use fossil fuels. And the more use of fossil fuels, the more the earth is heated up and the more damage that is happening in small island developing states. When you cut down trees to plant crops for animals, for example, in the US, they plant wheat, soy, and corn. You have to cut down a lot or clear a lot of land. Whenever you clear land, you're heating the environment because trees help to cool the environment. You have methane gas from the emissions from animals that also increases the temperature. And then you have planes, ships, and cars, all the emissions from these types of vehicles or not devices, but these types of transport services. All of these combined are causing an increase in carbon emissions around the world. The earth is heating up, and we in small island developing states are feeling the brunt of all of this. This is just a reminder. The first piece of information here is new information in this presentation. Before 2020, the spending on mental health services in the Americas, including Caribbean states, was only 2% of the total government budget, which to me poses the question, what is the other 98 being spent on? It's not enough. It's hardly enough. This is just a reminder of the gaps I mentioned earlier. A lack of studies on public mental health interventions in SIDS, unknown consequences of the long-term effects of climate change on mental health, not enough research on impacts caused by gradual changes due to climate change, limited research on the impact of climate change migration on the mental health, And unfortunately, now in the Caribbean, we now have one of the islands, the Cayman Islands, is in dialogue with the UK government to start moving some of their citizens across to England because of, again, rising sea level in the Cayman Islands, which is one of the flatter islands in the Caribbean. So it's not only on the Pacific side, it has now reached the Caribbean seas. Last gap here is the lack of research on the use of effective music and spiritual interventions to help address mental health issues. Now, for me, after writing this paper, I was asked, what do I think is the most concerning gap? To me, it's the long-term effects on the population, in particular the youth, because they represent our future. Early warning systems can be used to warn before the event. This is one thing we can start doing more work in. Now, why is mental health underrepresented in the region? These are my opinions based on what I've read and talking to colleagues working in the mental health sphere. I'm going to start with number 3 first. The mental health stigma is huge, not only by persons living in the region, but by the medical profession as well. Fear and misunderstanding often lead to prejudice against individuals with mental illness and addiction, even among the healthcare providers. This prejudice and discrimination both create significant obstacles to diagnosis and treatment. Number 1 and 2 are linked. The first, number 1, I don't think people are truly aware as to the extent of the problem. 1, because most money in healthcare is spent on medications. Private consults, costs associated with chronic care and technology, plus. The focus is on cure, not preventing the diseases in the first place. And this is a comment an older colleague gave me a couple months ago. He said, Rachel, the Ministry of Health should be renamed the Ministry of Disease because the focus is on curing diseases, not preventing them. We have to have consistent efforts to increase awareness about mental health and educate using certain methods. And this is where I want to spend the rest of the time on. How can we strengthen mental resilience in Caribbean SIDS before these events occur? The key point, the first 2 points here relate to education. Who are we educating? First of all, the doctors. Doctors have what is known as CME, which is continuing medical education. And my suggestion, which is already started in US, because in the university, UC Davis, if I recall correctly, I saw an article last year, where it is mandatory now for all university students to take a class in a climate related discipline, a course, one class. And that is my suggestion. Let it be mandatory for them to take a course in climate science and mental health, or you combine both in one course, because currently we do not have enough disaster-trained mental health professionals in the region. The second type of education I am advocating for is that we incorporate climate change education into 1, the curricula of schools, and 2, universities. It's going to be more difficult in the schools, I know, but in the universities, in the Caribbean, in the English-speaking Caribbean, the regional university is the University of the West Indies, and there are 5 campuses, 1 of which is online. The other 4, 1 is located in Jamaica, 1 is in Barbados, 1 is here in Trinidad, and the last one is the newest campus, which is in Antigua and Barbuda. Currently, the only mandatory course at the University of the West Indies in each of the islands is English. Plus, in Jamaica is something else, like history. In Trinidad is something else, but there's nothing here related to climate science. And that is one suggestion I am making now. It is easier to have a mandatory course to incorporate that into the university versus the curricula of schools, because in schools, you're looking at primary schools and high schools. And this is something that Cuba has done for many years, because I was advised to check what Cuba has done in terms of disaster management. There's a lot of information in Cuba based on this point here. Another point here is we need to have trauma-informed school environments to help school children, parents, and caregivers. So basically, we are creating a community of support, which is especially important following a disaster. We also need regular public education campaigns, not only by the media, but this should be done via community groups, religious organizations, youth groups, NGOs, dot, dot. And this has to be ongoing and should be a regular part of community life because these hurricanes are not stopping. Every year we're getting a Category 5 hurricane, literally. So we can't wait. The last point here, we have to put together a team. So we have to have standing teams in the islands to respond to local disasters. And this has to happen before another disaster hits. The second point I want to make, I speak from experience here. I have struggled with depression twice in my life, and it wasn't related to climate change. The first time I was in my 20s, I was trying to get out of Trinidad to go and do my PhD, and it took me 2 years to get the scholarship to get out of Trinidad, and I became depressed. I didn't know how to deal with it, but what happened to me was I lost a lot of weight because I wasn't eating properly, I wasn't sleeping properly. And then 2016 to 2020, I experienced depression again, and I did not take medication. I used spiritual healing, meaning I went deep into the Bible. I had a lot of people praying for and with me. I read a book by Joyce Meyer called Battlefield of the Mind, which is something I would recommend. I'm currently rereading it to help someone who is going through depression, and she keeps going in and out of the hospital because that is not the cure. You have to do some deep work here. And one of the things I'm currently working on now is a paper looking at the use of the creative art therapies, for example, music therapy, art therapy, dance movement therapy, which is not commonly used in the Caribbean, but there is success in terms of significantly reducing the levels of, for example, anxiety and depression. And the use of neuroplasticity, which I discovered in 2019 to help my mother. My mother was diagnosed in March of 2018 with early Alzheimer's, and that just literally turned my world upside down. I was working at the university part-time, but when she got ill, I left the university to take care of my mother, and I got help via caregivers. And one of the things we did with my mom is neuroplasticity, which basically is you keep engaging the mind. You don't leave them by themselves. You have to stimulate the mind. And one of the things I did with my mom was teach her the Bible. And she wanted me to teach her because I asked her. She said yes, and she was 86 when she started. And we did it for 3 years, from 2019 to 2022, one evening a week. And I can personally tell you, I saw my mother's spirit come alive. She was becoming more introverted because of the Alzheimer's. And she also didn't know what her purpose was at the time, because one of the things she told me many years ago when I was visiting from the US, she said her role, her purpose was to be a good wife and a mother. My father had died, which is what brought me back to Trinidad. So in her mind, she didn't know what her purpose was. And this is something that the elderly, it happens to the elderly a lot, especially when they lose a spouse. So neuroplasticity can not only build mental resilience in persons affected from climate change, it can help all of us because we all have to keep our mind engaged, regardless of age. Okay, we have to have an established protocol for mental health professionals to respond to disasters. The Franciscan Institute Trauma Team is one of the teams that goes into some of the islands in the region. The coordinator of this group is a good friend and colleague of mine. And they normally call out this team to help persons recover mentally from Category 5 hurricanes usually. We have to have not only monitoring and evaluation, we have to have effective and efficient monitoring and evaluation of existing systems and more development of early warning systems in the region. Excuse me. To my knowledge, Barbados has done a lot of work in the use of EWS in tracking the movement of mosquitoes related to dengue, which is one of the diseases we struggle with in the region. We have inadequate shelter accommodations currently in the region, but last year I saw an article online. Abaco Island is one of the islands in the Bahamas. They now have a Category 5 building built on Abaco Island because of what they suffered with in 2019, I believe it was, due to the hurricane at the time. We have to design more hurricane-resistant buildings. This needs to be mandatory for contractors now. I don't know if you remember the that struck Haiti. Almost 1,000 people in Haiti. And a big part of that was because of poor building codes. So the buildings just collapsed completely and killed a lot of people. Some of my Haitian friends and I, we left our countries and we went across to Haiti in 2013 to see how we could help. And I saw firsthand some of what they were experiencing. Lack of electricity, lack of services, lack of water. I mean, it was very eye-opening and in some cases, overwhelming to me. We can use what are known as nature-based solutions. For example, the planting of mangroves. Mangroves are known to help with soil, not so, coastal erosion because of the nature of the roots. Something else that we can do is change the type of agriculture that we use, because vertical farming can happen indoors if we are within a Category 5 building that can withstand the strength of these hurricanes that are hitting the Caribbean now. So these are some of the things that can be done to strengthen mental resilience in Caribbean SIDS. As you see, it's not an easy process. We have to take it step by step. So in conclusion, there has to be more action by all relevant stakeholders, especially the medical and mental health professions, because the paper that I wrote that came out last year, the research that I found was not done. The majority of it was not done by mental health professionals. It was those outside the professions. We have to have state governments, especially the policymakers, civil society, the private sector, international organizations, especially the universities where a lot of research is done. We can have continuing collaboration between universities in the region and those outside, and environmental scientists, climatologists, trained consultants, and researchers like myself who are not currently linked with the university, but we are in SIDS, and we have to use an evidence-based decision-making approach to address this huge problem of mental health and climate change in SIDS. The piece here, thing that happened last year that I had to here, because we had some lawyers from the Caribbean who presented before the International Court of Justice, and the court came out last year with a landmark advisory opinion that stated countries can be held legally accountable for greenhouse gas emissions, because that is the source of the problems that SIDS are facing worldwide, these greenhouse gas emissions. This was delivered on the 23rd of July last year. Even though it has no legal power, it paves the way forward for us to continue advocating. We in the Caribbean, or from the Caribbean, or from SIDS, we have to keep advocating for change. And I want to end with this quote by Margaret Mead in 2005. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. This is my contact information for anybody wanting to connect with me either via LinkedIn or via email. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Williams. That was absolutely fantastic. I will end the recording now and we will shift into question and answers.